This week's episode of the HP Outdoors Waterfowl Podcast is driven by Cornerstone Gun Dog Academy. CGA is the world's most comprehensive online gun dog training resource. They've got over 160 instructional videos, including everything you need to take a 7-week-old puppy to a finished gun dog. Visit cornerstonegundogacademy.com to sign up for their free preview module and begin your training journey today. Cornerstone Gun Dog Academy, the world's most advanced gun dog training resource on the web. You are listening to the HP Outdoors Waterfowl Podcast, episode 131. This week on the show, we're talking to new hunters. We've got 5 things that every new hunter should consider before they head to the field. All right, welcome to the 131st episode of the HP Outdoors Waterfowl Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Palm, and we're your on-demand audio source for all things waterfowl and waterfowl hunting. Check us out at hpoutdoors.com. You can find us across all social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you're a Facebook user, head over and check out our Facebook listeners group. You can also find us on all the great podcast catchers out there, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all of the good ones. Anywhere you can find quality podcast content, you can find our show. Joining me this week, as he always does, my co-host Dan Harushka. Dan, what's up?
Hey, man.
No tips this week?
Yeah, I got just a tip. So.
Oh, well, please. Let's hear it.
It's called cruise control. Most waterfowl fly at speeds of 40 to 60 miles an hour, with many averaging right between there, roughly 50 miles an hour.
So many, they fly between 40 to 60, so many average.
So
somewhere.
Right in between.
All right, cool.
All right, with a 50 mile an hour tailwind, migrating mallards are capable of traveling 800 miles during 8 hours of flight, which mathematically works. And that is a very long distance. So if you have storm fronts coming in, if you have storm fronts coming in and you had no birds the day before, just keep that little tip right in the back of your mind, because they might be there that day. They could have flown in from 800 miles away.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I've seen similar things happen. I mean, I don't know how far they've come in, obviously, but I've definitely seen birds show up overnight or, on those good northwest wind days, things like that. See birds pop in. So again, not a tip, but just the tip. Anyway, before we get too much further down the road on this week's episode, do want to take a minute just to thank Gunner Kennels. They're engineered for your dog, designed for travel, and built for your peace of mind. The G1 Kennel has set a new industry standard and put Gunner Kennels in a category all its own. They were started to protect your pet, and it continues to be at the center of everything they do. They are dedicated to building the best and safest pet travel crate on the market, because man's best friend deserves man's best kennel. Check out your G1 series of kennels and accessories at gunnerkennels.com. Also, thank you to 737 Duck and Goose Calls, original design, select grade components, superior sound, and unparalleled service. 737 takes exceptional pride in producing the finest quality, best built premium calls on the market today. That is a tongue twister. They're made right here in America and offered only direct to consumers through their website. Shipping in the U.S. is always free, and international orders are also now accepted online. 20-day money-back guarantee and lifetime warranty accompanies every call purchased. 737 Duck Calls lead the flock. Also got a new supporter this week, Big Kansas Outdoors. It's the premier waterfowl and upland destination in central Kansas. Big Kansas Outdoors puts you on phenomenal waterfowl hunting in the morning, followed by great afternoon pheasant and quail hunting. Check them out on Facebook and Instagram. Big Kansas Outdoors, it's an experience of a lifetime. So thank you to the companies that support our show. You can head over to the discount page at hpoutdoors.com and check out all of the current discount codes that we have available to you. So if you're in the market for some goods, head over there, check it out, see if we might be able to save you a little bit of coin.
I was going to say, too, if you do not follow Gunner Kennels or ever check out their stories, get on Instagram. They've been highlighting some vehicle accidents where the Gunner Kennel was in the back of the truck or SUV or whatever. And some of these trucks are like, rolling over, straight demolished. And, their dogs are walking away, no issues whatsoever. So definitely a quality product, and you take a look at the pictures, you're like, oh my goodness, and thankfully everyone's walked away. So,
yep,
something to look into.
Yeah, no doubt.
Big fan.
All right, this week on the show we're going to cover. We call it 5 things. It may be 4, it may be 6. Who knows? But we're calling it 5 things that all new hunters should consider before heading to the field for the first time. And I think what really kind of was the genesis of this topic was, it seems like this time of year, more than any other time, we get a lot of questions in our Facebook group and people emailing us and reaching out to us asking about things because they're going to pursue waterfowl this year for the first time. And, this is a good time to be asking these questions, because a lot of things that we're going to cover today in this show are things that we kind of felt like were, just not difficult to grasp, but different in a lot of ways than from traditional hunting. So if you're like a deer hunter or a turkey hunter or something like that, we're going to highlight some things that are going to be different for you being a waterfowl hunter that you may have not considered in the past. So the time to learn these little things and the little nuance that goes in with waterfowl hunting is in the summer and the off season. The first, time you consider some of the things we're going to talk about should not be when you're in the blind or after your first hunt kind of thing. So we're going to hit a handful of things that we think are valuable for everyone to kind of consider. And even for the experienced hunter, if you've got someone that you're going to introduce to hunting for the first time, maybe it's your son or your grandson or, a nephew or a friend from church or whatever it is, if you're going to introduce someone to the outdoors and waterfowl hunting, you may want to consider these handful of things to talk to them about. Oftentimes I think when we're hunting with someone that we're mentoring, sometimes we may overlook the basics because you're kind of taking care of the basics for them. Like they don't have to worry about, things like what time is shooting light and what time is this and, what bird is that flying in the air, because you're doing a lot of that for them. But it's still worthwhile to talk about and kind of go over. So, this episode may help you with that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, I think some of the things that we're going to cover too are, I want to call them the oh crap moments, because you're out in a field and you didn't realize that something was a law, or you didn't realize what the limit was for a specific species or whatever it may be. So to prevent those things from happening, that's another purpose of this episode.
Yeah. And I can tell you with 100% certainty that it's happened to people who are would tell you that they're experienced hunters, right? I mean, I've seen pictures on Facebook, in our Facebook group, where people are posting pictures of over harvesting particular species of ducks in their bag limit and not realizing that they screwed up the bag limit. So it does happen. So you're never too veteran or too seasoned to kind of like check the box on the basics and the fundamentals. So we're going to hit some of those this week. But before we do that, we got another HPOWP tip of the week delivered by Barton Ramsey. So let's go ahead and roll that puppy now. No pun intended.
Hey guys, this is Barton Ramsey from Cornerstone Gundog Academy with your retriever training quick tip of the episode, brought to you by HPOWP. Today I want to talk about cold water and preventing hypothermia with your dog. This season alone, the 2018 to 2019 waterfowl season, I have heard of 3 dogs passing away from hypothermia and 1 dog nearly passing away from hypothermia that was caught fairly early. All of them were retrieving in the water. All of them were retrieving in the water so that they could bring the bird back and then get out of the water, which that's actually very important. You never want to leave your dog in the water for the hunt. You always want to make sure you have some type of stand, whether it's a tree stand or a mow marsh stand or a boat or some way to get them out of the water, dried off. But they were having long swims on birds that were either diving or cripples that were swimming away, and the dogs would come back, and I guess the handlers were not recognizing that the dog's body temperature was dropping. And so rather than go into what happened with those guys, I want to talk about some measures that you guys can take to prevent that from happening with you and your dog. And so what you're going to want to do is make sure when the dog is out in the water for long periods of time, just know the longer they're in freezing water, whether it's ice water or water that's even 40, 45, 50 degrees, their body temperature is going to be dropping significantly because they're surrounded by that water. And so you're going to want to have a way to dry them off and keep them warm. Most importantly, you're going to want to have a way to keep them out of the wind while they're performing or while they're waiting on the next group of birds. And so whether that's a Momarsh stand that has a blind attached to it, some sort of wall that you've built to keep the wind blocked from them, or some sort of small heater that you have in the blind that will warm them up simultaneously, you're going to want to remember that while they get out, they need some way to warm back up. Otherwise, their body temperature is going to continue to drop as their fur is wet, and wind on wet fur will create a cooler temperature or pull the body temperature down below what it's supposed to be. And so all the while you think, as you're warm and toasty in a coat and you're dry, hey, they're a Labrador, they're meant for cold water, they have a double coat. Yeah, all those things are true, but if there's no way for them to equalize, for them to keep their body temperature maintained and then warm back up, then it continues to drop with each retrieve. If you notice your dog begin to become lethargic, they give you a no-go on a dog that usually has a lot of drive in the water, they refuse to get in the water, they don't want to work, they're laying down, they're trembling severely, then you're going to want to begin the steps of warming your dog's body temperature back up, which is going to require you to leave the hunt, take the dog to a vehicle, put heat on the dog, wrap the dog up, and most likely get the dog to the vet to get its temperature back regulated. You just want to be careful in these instances. It does not take much to bring a dog to a dangerous level of hypothermia. And they don't know. A lot of dogs will continue to work, continue to pick up birds, continue to go out after marks and swim because that's what they're bred to do. That's what their drive is telling them to do. So it is up to us as their owner to keep an eye on them, to protect them, to make sure that we watch for the signs of hypothermia and step in, intervene before it becomes too late. So take care of your dogs, keep an eye on them, make sure you have some sort of plan for them staying warm, keeping warm, raising the body temperature back up, because there's no bird that's worth losing your retriever.
All right. Thank you to Barton, and thank you to Eukanuba for this week's tip. And I think it's a good one, Dan. I mean, a lot of people, I think, take a lot of pride in putting their dog in difficult conditions and letting their dog beast mode out and all of these kinds of things that make for great Instagram posts, but really can be dangerous for your dog. And I think it's definitely something that people should consider. And like Barton said, I mean, he's known of several instances where this actually cost the dog their life. So definitely not something to be taken lightly.
Yeah. We always, especially when it starts getting later in the season, talk about hypothermia in dogs. Like he said, 3 dogs had passed away already, and last year that he knew about. I'm sure there were many more, but even if, when they have those undercoats, when they're in the water, and I mean, that just zaps your heat, it zaps your energy, and, you need to, they're another hunting buddy. So you got to take care of them, make sure they're up out of the water. I've seen people with the buddy heaters right next to the dog, make sure they're up and out of the water, try and dry them off. And I have a chamois cloth that I'll take, it'll take the water off Kimber and can wring it out.
Is it a ShamWow?
I don't think it's a ShamWow. I'm not sure what it is.
So it's a knockoff ShamWow.
It's like a Sham Now. And
definitely knockoff.
But anyway, it'll get the water off them. And, I don't have a buddy heater, but I'm not the guy that says, if I can't bring my dog, I'm not coming. Like I know, you always see that. If I can't take my dog, I'm not going. Or, if I do go, then my dog's coming with me. And some of those times are, the times where these dogs probably passed away. They're too cold and you don't know the signs. And unfortunately that happens. So it's very unfortunate. And, be prepared.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people have the misconception, misunderstanding. I don't know what you want to call it, but they think that if they throw on a neoprene vest that their dog's invincible. And
Right.
I think, obviously nothing could be further from the truth. So just because you throw an insulated neoprene vest on your dog does not mean that they can withstand the harshest conditions and, all of those things. So,
Right. And there's not, I don't want to put a number on it, but I bet that most of the hunters out there, I bet that their duck dogs do not stay outside all day to where they can develop the proper undercoat. So like Kimber, she's in the house, whatever the temperature is through the winter. I take her outside, she swims for a short hunt. I can tell she's starting to feel it, and that's on me, and I know what her limits are. So I don't push that. And especially now, she's going to be 10 in May. So 10 and a half this coming year. Like, she's going to be very limited on when I take her, especially when the temperature starts to fall.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely something to be aware of. And I'm glad that this week's tip can shed a little light on that. So something to think about this year is when the weather turns colder and you're loading up the dog. All right, man, let's shift gears here a little bit and get into this week's main topic. And like we said, it's 5 things to consider, for new hunters. Maybe 4, maybe 6, a little both, somewhere in that range, as you like to put it. But anyway, we're going to hit on some things that we think are pretty critical to consider before you go out for your first hunt. Keyword being before you go out for your first hunt. And let's start it off with the biggest one, in my opinion, is just the regulations that surround waterfowl hunting. They're unique to waterfowl, and they're really unique if you've grown up like a deer hunter or a turkey hunter or a moose, elk, something like that, whatever, big game. The waterfowl laws are so much different and they have so much nuance to them that you really need to spend some time familiarizing yourself with your local laws, not just local, but federal laws that regulate waterfowl hunting. Bag limits, possession limits, things of that nature all really matter and can get you really jammed up if you don't know them. And it's something that can easily be missed by a hunter. And I think that, unfortunately, if it comes down to brass tacks and you're talking to the game warden, it's your responsibility to know the law. So saying I didn't realize or I didn't know, that's not going to do you any good when it comes time for citations and things like that. So, I don't know if you have any regulations that, Dan, that you think of immediately that come to mind that sort of.
Yeah, man. I think let's start out. And this is something that I've said before. It freaks me out, especially when I travel to a different state, but just the license requirements, right? So everyone, to go out and hunt waterfowl, you need your federal duck stamp, your state hunting license, state waterfowl stamp, and then the HIP, right? The Harvest Information Program. And that's something like, if I go somewhere and I have that taken care of right off the bat, that is like 80% of my stress taken off my shoulders. Because I know if I'm out there hunting and I get checked, that I'm allowed to be there, right? Like, I'm allowed to participate in the hunt, even if I haven't even shot anything. And then from knowing that I have my license taken care of and I'm legal in that aspect, then I can move forward onto the rest of the list.
Well, I think too, the big thing to point out there is that unless you're like a snipe hunter or something, you probably have no idea what a HIP number is and what a HIP license, what that requirement is. You probably, the federal duck stamp is kind of, I'd like to say it's well known, but the idea of having something like that is pretty easy to identify in the guide booklets. It's a physical, stamp that you buy. It's kind of a little more in the line of traditional licenses, but like a HIP is like, it's kind of a weird sort of nuance. It's unique to waterfowl that I'm aware of. And, I think that's some things like that can be easily overlooked. The good news about the HIP is when you buy your license, if you're buying it online, it essentially forces you to get it most of the time. So it's hard to it's helpful in that regard, but it's just something that you're not going to really know unless someone tells you, or you have a counter agent selling you a license or something that is aware, that makes sure you get what you need, kind of deal.
And that never happens. The people at Walmart never know what you need.
Yeah,
so make sure you know
certainly
that.
Can't rely on them to know the right,
Right.
things. And it's the same thing. It's like if the warden asks you why you don't have something, your answer better not be, well, the guy at Walmart said, didn't say that I needed it. That's not gonna fly.
Right.
So,
and a good, one thing that we usually do when we do go out of state, we'll go on a weekend hunt, and most states do have a 3-day small game / waterfowl license. So, you don't have to buy the full year license for the state, and it'll save you quite a few dollars.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And, so you have the licensing requirement that's unique, but then you've got other areas that are unique to waterfowling, and some that a lot of guys really don't pay attention to that closely. So, for example, bag limit, right? You're allowed to harvest certain amount of species to basically make up your daily bag limit. So, four mallards or whatever, whatever your little, your mixture of subspecies is there that comprises your daily bag limit. What a lot of guys will not pay attention to, particularly when you're hunting all the same species. So if you're Canada goose hunting or hunting specks or whatever it is, where you're killing kind of the same species, they don't realize that the law actually says that you have to keep those divided up per hunter limit. So like if you and I go hunting and it's a three bird per limit bag, and we've got 4 geese shot, we need to have those divvied up amongst us. We legally, we can't just have them in a pile, right? So we need to have if you shot 2 and I shot 2, or you shot 3 and I shot 1, whatever it is, you're supposed to have them laid out. So if a warden comes to the field to check you, you better have your pile of birds right there with you, and not all the group's birds, if you're hunting with multiple people, just piled up in a, inside the blind or whatever, because they want to know who shot what.
Right. And that, I know Big Kansas Outdoors and Falco, if we were in layout blinds, when you shot a bird, you put it right behind your blind. Those were your birds counting towards your limit.
Yep.
And when I know we got checked here right at the Conneaut Lake, we were hunting a field, hunting geese, and all in layout blinds. The guy comes out, he actually waited for a volley, tucked down, and we shot a couple more birds, and he came out, everyone's legal, and we had birds kind of in between a few blinds and around, and he's like, all right, fellas, who shot what? And when you stand there, and if it's touching your blind or if it's not touching your blind, and this is a few years ago before, I really knew that they needed to be divided. So we're like, well, I know what my limit is, and grabbed my limit, and the next guy grabbed, or not a full limit, but whatever it was, and got through it. But definitely dividing it is the way to go, the legal way to go.
Yeah, and it's an easy thing to do, right?
Right.
I mean, most of the time, if you've got 5 guys out there and you're hunting geese and you've got 3 per man, you're counting that total number to make sure you don't shoot over the number. Just when you recover your birds, just lay them out by your blind, or by the person, so that if you're checked, these are my 3, these are those 3, that kind of thing. So it's easy to make sure that no individual person is overshooting their limit.
And that'd get even trickier if you're in a panel blind or something like that. So make sure that, maybe the guy to your left has them in front of you and you put yours behind you. And, if a warden sneaks up and looks in and they're all in one pile, if he's in a bad mood that day, you can get nailed for that. So,
yep. What other regulations, Dan, do you think are worthwhile to mention in this type of context where, someone's new to the game and they're getting ready to head out? Any others that come to your mind off the top of your head that you want to mention?
Yeah, man. I think we all, when we get out there, and especially you get those early birds coming into your into your spread, you hear flying over you and you want to shoot, but making sure you know what the shooting time is. and every time you're out hunting, if there's people around you, public land, you know that people are shooting before daylight or before shooting hours, right? And I think knowing, having that chart with you and knowing where you're at and being legal there, I mean, you can get nailed for that just as quick as anything else.
Yeah, I mean, two things with that. This is probably worthwhile if someone's never hunted before. If you've hunted before, big game or otherwise, there are legal shooting hours for all species, all game. So the idea of legal shooting hours should not be a new concept to you unless you've never hunted before. So then, this is probably something that's worthwhile. The other thing with that is, the days of the chart, where the chart's on the back of the annual digest or whatever, and you need to follow that crap. Those days should be long gone. Like if you've got a smartphone, there are a bazillion apps out there that will tell you what time the sun rises and sunsets based on your GPS location. So there is no excuse. And for me, I always use the my cell phone time because, if your watch is 5 minutes early, the game warden's not going to care. But your cell phone, at least to me, is the most accurate time that I have on me. So that's what I use. And I use an app that shows me sunrise, sunset times, and I go with that. So
I still have a chart with me.
It's terrible.
That is one of my just being legal anxiety issues. But you know what? Going back to the daily bag limit that we were talking about.
Is this one more thing?
No, well, kind of one more thing, but you need to keep up with it. You need to check it because, I mean, look in just the last few years, canvasbacks have went from 1 to 2, pintails from 2 to 1 to 2, right?
Black ducks has changed. Mallards are changing. It changes all the time.
Right.
Scaup have changed.
Well, that's like if I took my dad out this coming year or my father-in-law, if I told him where to go, if he didn't read that stuff, then he might come out with 4 mallards, and we're going to be down to 2 in the Atlantic Flyway. And if you're on the Pacific Flyway, you're shooting 7 mallards. So depending where you're at, make sure you check the regs in your area.
Yeah. I think the thing that I will leave you with on regulations is your responsibility to know them. So spend the time looking at them and know that there are nuances that you are not going to have to deal with other species. And frankly, part of me thinks that some of the reasons why we are losing duck hunters is because of the way the regulations are. And there's just so much to consider to make sure that you're not screwing up. Be sure, check your gear, check your bag. If you're wearing, camo that you also wear when you go, squirrel hunting or something like that, make sure you don't have any lead shells in your pockets. Even having lead on you in the duck blind is a no-no. Like inadvertent or not, if it's down in your pocket or in the bottom of your blind bag, you will get nailed for stuff like that. So just double check, be super sure, and avoid the potential headache of having to deal with something like that. So, I think we've sufficiently beat that point down. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that, that takes me back to when we were talking to, the guys from Red Eye Outfitters with the cranes. I didn't know that you could use lead on them, and, having that in your blind bag and then possibly going goose hunting later on, like that's just another thing that you need to make sure, swapping things out all the time, and you don't want to leave. I mean, it's hard enough to clean out your bag at the end of a season, let alone every day to make sure, those are swapped out. It's something I would be really freaking out about.
Yeah. I actually, I don't have that problem where I need to worry about it that often, but what I do anyway is I know exactly how many shells I take to the field with me, and I know how many times I fired. So I track, I have an accountability of every shell that I should have left when I bring into the field so that nothing can get misplaced, nothing can get mixed up. So if I take 25 shells in there, I know how many I should have on me when I leave based on how many times I've shot.
I do want to say when I flew back from Arkansas, the snow goose hunt, I did have a shotgun shell in my jacket. It was still in my checked luggage, but it was not, you're not allowed to have loose ammo.
Yeah.
So I could have been in trouble there.
Yeah, they probably would have just confiscated if they found it. But,
yeah.
I mean, Anyway. All right.
Breaking the law.
Yeah, you're a felon. What can you say? And at least you didn't admit it on a recorded podcast that'll be on the internet forever. So
they didn't see it. I was just joking. I was just making sure people don't.
On that
just
deal?
Making sure other people don't do it. I was scaring them. Sure. That was all.
All right, let's move on. The next point is one that I know I didn't put a lot of thought into when I first started hunting, and I almost got myself into a bad situation a couple times that really forced me to think about it. But it's bird retrieval and decoy deployment / retrieval, kind of all in the same deal. And where we're going with this one is, as a waterfowl hunter, this is your first time doing it. It's probably the first time that you've hunted with water squarely in the equation if you're not hunting fields. So this could mean your first experience hunting with deeper water, hunting in water with obstructions in it, beaver ponds, beaver chutes, downed logs, things like that. Hunting in moving water with current and tides and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of variables that water introduces into the hunting equation, none of which gets any easier when you're talking about doing it in the dark, right? So I remember one of the first hunts that I went on by myself. I was hunting in a creek that earlier in the year when I had hunted it one time, it was much lower and shallower and was easily wadable all the way across. And I was just using some like lifetime rigs, throwing a couple mallards out and kind of hunting over moving water. Well, I hunted there later in the year after we had some snow and rain, and the water level was much higher and it was much faster. And it was really hard to get my decoys deployed. If I had shot a bird, I have no idea how I would have recovered it because the water was moving so fast. And to actually retrieve my decoys, I was like in moving water up to almost the limit of my waders trying to recover them. And in hindsight, it was just really stupid and just kind of a bad deal. So thinking about those kinds of things before you find yourself chest deep in freezing water is probably a really good idea. So I don't know about you, Dan, but I mean, there's probably a couple tools that could be used here that would make this a little bit easier. But I know you've hunted a lot of different water scenarios. In your area, you get a lot of different variations between swamps and lakes and things like that. So, what's your experience kind of in this situation been?
Yeah, I mean, there's no worse feeling than not being able to retrieve a bird, 2, not being able to retrieve your decoys, and 3, knowing that if you actually hunted and shot a bird that you couldn't do it, so you just end up calling the hunt. And that's about the worst. So we throw a lot of decoys. You always see on social media guys just launching decoys, right? And if you show up to a place, there's no worse feeling than walking out and, like you mentioned, beaver runs before. If you're hunting a beaver swamp, there will be runs, and even the local lakes here too. There's runs where you'll be up over your head before you know it. So
yeah,
even having a walking stick or an extendable pole that can reach out and either grab your down bird or your decoys is pretty much a must. And that is especially necessary if you don't have a canoe. I always try and take a canoe if possible, but you can walk out and hold on to the side. And I've done that to where, I had my canoe and I'm walking out and hit a beaver run. And if it wasn't for that canoe being there and me being able to hold myself up and get back on solid ground, I'd have been in really bad shape. So, having that walking stick or an extendable pole that you can use as one and then reach out and get that. But there's been many times, I know Trav and I hunted outflow, And we got there, we didn't take Kimber, and we got to this place, and I was like, dude, I said, this is moving too fast. Like, we wouldn't be able to set decoys because it was such a steep drop off. And I said, if we shoot birds, I said, if it's on the other side, that bird's gone. Like, we can't hunt that. So it was actually so high that it flooded out some little turns on the river. So we hunted some overflow areas and shot a couple mallards on it. But there were guys going up and down in boats, and you'd see it. They'd shoot and get in a boat and run downstream to get their birds. So, and that was a day that I was not sending Kimber into, and that was a couple years ago. So, being aware of water, especially when it's cold, moving fast, and if you're not familiar with it, which we weren't very familiar with this and the depth, it's better just to pack it in or find a little spot where birds might, jump off the main trail. And that's what we did that day and had some success.
Yeah. I mean, if you're lucky, you'll get to hunt some areas that you've fished before, and you may have some kind of idea of what the water depth is going to be. But, think about like the scenario where you're hunting a farm pond, right? If you don't have a canoe or a john boat with you, and you don't have a dog, if you shoot a bird that lands out in the middle of that pond and there's no wind or anything, how are you going to get it, right? I mean, I love the idea of people saying, "Oh, I'll take a fishing rod with a treble hook and I'll cast it out there, whatever." Okay, like if that works for you, God bless you. I'm not doing that. I think it's just smart to have a plan. So in that scenario, you might tell yourself, okay, I'm only going to shoot them on the sides, or I'm only going to shoot like in certain areas where I know the water's shallow and I can get to them. Like, I'm not going to shoot immediately out this way because I know I can't recover birds, right? Like, have a thought put together for that. And further, when you come to water, if you're not experienced hunting around water, and it's your first year waterfowl hunting, when it gets cold and water starts icing up, it's like you have to relearn again what to do, because now that you get stuff starting to freeze over, you got to think about, like, how am I going to get birds if they land over there on the ice, and can I get to that bird? And all of those sort of things play into it, and it becomes that much more dangerous when you start talking about messing with ice. So, just have yourself a little bit of a plan or an idea of what you're going to do as far as how you're going to retrieve, and if it's safe to actually execute that plan before you get out there. Because, if you don't have that little thought process ahead of time, you're going to get out there, you're going to shoot a bird, and you're going to be forced to try to recover it in an unsafe situation, and that's when accidents happen. So definitely think through it before you do it, and you'll be safer and have better hunts in the long run.
And I do want to, going back to the safety, there's two things that come to, this is just my section of the safety, right? So there's a farm pond that is between a few fields that we hunt, and every once in a while we'll try and shoot birds over this pond. Well, there's one, I skipped the hunt, and I asked the guys how it went afterwards, and they're like, well, we almost lost one of the guys. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, this farm pond is just a ton of sediment, right? So he went out to try and get the decoys, and he's out, I don't know what it was, 15 yards, and he was stuck. Literally he couldn't move. So what do you do in that situation? They're trying to, get big sticks and try and pull them out. And I mean, if you're chest deep and you start getting pulled by a stick, then, it doesn't take much to start filling up with water, and who knows where it's going to go from there. Anyways, he ended up getting out. It was not a fun situation. And, the farmer actually kind of put a ban on that because he knows how crappy the bottom is there. And that takes me to another hunt when we went up to Maine, and for the guys that are hunting, sea ducks and hunting the ocean a little bit, when that water goes out, that was some of the stickiest mud I've ever seen in my life. And when you're talking, you're talking 20-foot tides up in Maine. So they said, that's how some of the lobster guys, some of the crabbing guys die, because they'll walk out to get their nets, and they'll get stuck, and then the tide comes in and they're done. And when we went out to get we carried the canoes down, and I was one of the first to get ferried out to the outcrop. But then Joe was back with Ryan Lilly from Old Town Canoes, and Joe got stuck. Literally, he could not get out, and he had to take his waders off. Mind you, it's -13 with like -45 wind chill. He had to come out of his waders and fall into the canoe, and then they had to pull his waders out of that mud because he couldn't get out. So anyway, safety talk.
That storm has been spoke about more times.
It was epic, man. It was epic.
Even count on this show.
But did I ever tell you that story?
I don't remember. I tend to glaze over when I hear -45 wind chill.
It might have been -55.
Whatever. It's cold. We know this.
It's my story. I'll tell it how I want.
That's right. All right, let's move on.
But anyway,
we're never going to get through this list if we don't work forward here. You got one more thing about bird retrieval?
I do.
You gonna tell? Are you gonna tell a story about Falco now?
No. Make sure if you're throwing decoys into deeper water that you have lifetime rigs or rigs that do not crimp. Because if the weight does not go all the way down and you get a few waves that come in, you'll be watching your decoys sail out into the middle of the lake. And if you don't have a way to get them, you'll lose however many dollars that decoy is. I've done that before.
Yep.
That's my one last thing.
All right, cool. All right, let's move on to the next thing. And this one was actually one that I personally struggled with quite a bit when I first started waterfowl hunting. And that is judging yardage and shooting at the appropriate birds. That's not really how I wanted to put that. But what I mean by this is when I first started hunting, I was passing shots on birds that were in shootable range because I was not used to seeing a small bird flying that fast, like across my face from left to right at 30 yards. And to me, it looked too far away. And I was just passing shots. And then I finally got to realize, I was like, well, if I don't start shooting at these birds, like I'm not going to get to shoot at all. And I started having success harvesting birds at that distance. So then I realized how many birds I'd pass over time. And if you don't have any experience doing this, it's going to lead you to do one of two things. You're either going to do like I did and not shoot at birds that are in killable range, or you're going to shoot at birds that are outside of your killable range because you just don't know what that range is. And fortunately, I'd rather pass shots that I can make than take shots that I can't make. But it's definitely something that takes some time to develop, in my opinion. This is particularly true if you're hunting public ground or anywhere where you're going to be getting passing shots. If you're hunting situations where you're going to have birds back flapping into your decoys, then this is probably a moot point for you. But for a lot of guys, pass shooting is what you get, and you need to be ready for that. So, one of the things that I learned, and I don't think this is any kind of secret, but it definitely helps, is identify what your comfortable range is, whether that's 30 yards, 40 yards, somewhere in between, whatever, and put a decoy or two out at that far range so that when birds are coming across your set, if they're near that furthest decoy, that's about the extent of your range or anything inside of that, you're good to go. So it helps you kind of take the guesswork out. And over time, you sort of get a feel for that. But I think that this is something that a lot of guys don't consider. And I do believe that that's why you see a lot of the guys sky busted and things like that, because they just think that, well, I can just lead them a little more and I can make that shot. No, that's not going to happen. Then you tend to just be more guys sky busted and things like that. So I think judging yardage and shooting at birds that are in your killable range is something that takes a little bit of adjustment getting used to when you first start hunting out.
Yeah, I think even when we goose hunt, the person that puts the furthest one out usually walks it off, and they'll tell us, that furthest one's at 38 or whatever it may be. But this takes me back to last week's episode with Boss and just talking about, before you go out, get some practice in, get on the range a little bit with some clays and try and get familiar with a smaller target moving and what kind of lead you need. I think that's pretty vital.
Yeah, and I like to say that shooting clays helps, but it's definitely not going to. It's not going to help you when you're shooting at a group of like 12 or 18 birds coming by. It's not going to help you pick one out and that kind of thing, right? I mean, all of that takes time. I mean, there's a lot of air around flocks of birds, and I'm really good at hitting a lot of air around them because, it's just hard when you get big knots of birds, even big knots of birds like finishing in your decoys. It's easy to miss if you don't focus and pick one and execute the shot and then pick another one and execute that shot. It's very, very hard to do. And it's even harder for someone that's new to the sport and doesn't have a lot of experience doing it. So while I agree with you, shooting clays and stuff will help you learn your effective range, swing through the shot. All of those critical pieces of the shot can be learned on the range. But there's that little nuance that's just something that you need to prepare yourself mentally for. Okay, pick one, kind of thing, or you will just flock shoot. And usually, as hard as it is to believe sometimes, that's usually not an effective strategy.
No, that's you have to, even, how long we've been hunting, every time, like, just pick one. And it's really hard. It gets harder on the follow-up shots, I feel like, because the first one you're dialed in on a bird, and then you're just like, oh, where do I go? Oh, yeah.
And I mean, that's like my saying. Every hunt I'm on, I'm like, I can't wait to just flock shoot the first group. Just get that out of my system. Just take the edge off. It's like I do it once and I can settle in. So that's definitely one that I think is needs to be considered for a first time guy, and not something that you can really anticipate till you get yourself in the scenario and you experience it for yourself. You kind of truly get a grasp for what it is. You got one last thing, or are we good to move on?
No, I'm done. I'm done. Last things.
Okay. All right. I believe this is what we're going to call number 4, but transporting your harvest is something that is definitely different for waterfowl. And I'm curious, Dan, are there transportation tagging requirements for big game? I believe there is, but it's different. Like, for example, here in Virginia, you have to like notch your tag when you harvest a deer before you move it, but then you don't have to affix like a tag or anything physically to the deer. I believe in Pennsylvania, you actually have to like tag the deer or something, don't you?
Yeah, which it's actually legal to wrap it around an antler if you shoot a buck. It has to be. And what I do, I still have, we have the smaller licenses now. Before it used to be like the big big back tag. Well, now I put my license in a fishing license holder. So then I'll fill everything out and I'll just put that through the ear. So then it's just a pinhole. I remember growing up, my dad used to just shove a knife right through it, but I know taxidermists don't like that. So
that's what I always did too. But we bring this up because to transport your birds, particularly if you're hunting with other people and you're transporting birds for them or whatever, those birds need to be tagged so that each one is attributable to each hunter to ensure that you haven't shot your bag limit, and further to that end, to ensure that you're not having more of your possession limit. And your possession limit is equal to 3 times your bag limit. So if you can shoot 3 birds a day, you can have 9 birds in your possession limit. And if you've got 3 guys in the truck and you've got 9 geese, those birds need to be tagged by each individual hunter to ensure that you're not, well, let me rephrase that. If you got 4 guys in the truck and it's 3 and you got 12 birds, let's say, those need to be tagged so that you don't have to try to defend why you've got more than your possession limit in your possession if it's your vehicle or whatever.
Yeah. And I know, an easy way to do it is just have zip ties and get your birds zip tie. If you don't have any trophy birds that you're trying to get mounted, just zip tie their necks together or their legs together, whatever. Have one of the tags on there with all your information and you're good to go.
Yeah.
Easy peasy.
It's an easy step that a lot of people neglect. Most people only tend to think about this if they're taking their birds to like a processor or they're taking them to a taxidermist where the person on the receiving end is going to require that kind of information. Most guys don't think about, well, what if we get pulled over on the way home? Or what if there's a warden watching us hunt and now he's followed us and he's going to check us after we're out of the field or whatever? Transporting waterfowl is a big deal, and it's an easy way to get yourself pinched if you don't do it correctly. So tagging your game is important. You can find tags very, very easily out there on the internet to print off and just bang out real quick. So I think that's definitely a little
that's
different.
Probably one of the that's probably one of the most not utilized, I would say.
Oh, yeah, it's an overlooked regulation for sure by most people. They don't think about that. I never thought about it much. And
even, I mean, if you think about it, like if you have those birds and you're carrying all your decoys out of the field, say you walk into a field, you carry your decoys out, your blinds out, and then, we used to have like the new hunter in the group, oh, you carry the birds out. Well, that could end up in a bad situation if he's carrying over his limit.
Right.
So,
for sure.
I mean, things to think about.
Yep, no doubt. All right. Let's jump to the last thing here, and that is post-hunt processing. So this is one that I think can go a couple different ways. But to start, if you've been a deer hunter, for example, and you've always taken your deer to a processor to be cut up and all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of work that you haven't really had to deal with. And let's say with waterfowl, you're going to do it yourself because it's smaller, more manageable. Okay. But there's a lot of things you have to consider here. One, when you start cleaning birds, even if you don't pluck the bird, there are going to be feathers everywhere. And, like if you live in a neighborhood like me, it's suburbia, and if I'm trying to like pluck birds and we got wind, or I'm breasting birds and we got wind, I got feathers blowing around. I got my neighbors like wondering what the heck's going on. You got a lot of kind of periphery things to consider when you're going to breast your birds. So, being comfortable with what you need to do to make that as an efficient process as possible is a big one. And I've gotten to the point where I've stopped plucking birds. I pretty much do the whole, pinch above the breastbone, jerk the thing open, cut the breast, call it good. That's my preferred method. I don't know about you, Dan. It's probably a little bit different scenario for you where you live, but I think the biggest thing that we would both agree on is no matter where you live, the place to leave, you see it every once in a while. Guys will clean birds at like the boat ramp or something, and they'll leave carcasses and feathers and junk all over the place. And then you got like kayakers and bird watchers and stuff coming in and seeing all that, and it gives us a bad look. So just having a place to do it, knowing what you're going to do with the carcasses and all that kind of stuff is definitely one piece of this post-hunt processing thing that we wanted to make sure the guys are considering.
Yeah, I think that's about the worst look you can have is just, resting it out and leaving it right next to the, be safe hunting sign on public land or something like that. So, definitely, I mean, there's tons of recipes out there. If you really want to get into it, you can, I know Ducks Unlimited has stuff. Delta has stuff. Hank Shaw, if you want to get the Duck Duck Goose book, which I would really like to utilize a lot more this year. And I think I'm going to. So, definitely a lot of ways you can go about it. Jerky, anything you want to do. But like you said, take care of it the right way. If you're at home, then, you throw it in the garbage bag, throw it out, put it out with the trash and be done with it.
Yeah. Again, like for me, if I hunt on Saturdays and Sundays, my trash doesn't come till Tuesdays. So if it's like September and it's hot, I have to dispose of those carcasses before the trash day comes because they just get ripe. So, having a plan ahead of time, like if you're going to hunt and it's hot, like we get that early September goose season and it's still really hot, you have to have a plan to be able to process those birds and get them cooled down very quickly, or that meat will not take long to spoil. If it's later in the season and you shoot them and it's cold and you want to hang them for a while, that's fine. You can do that too. But just know that if the weather is going to dictate quicker action on your part, that you got a plan to do that and you're going to take care of it. So like if you're thinking, okay, one thing that I ran up against one time was we were hunting in September and it was hot and we have 10 bird per man limit. and me and a buddy shot 2-man limit of geese, so 20 birds between two of us. And he was leaving like right after the hunt to go to his lake house for the weekend. And I was like, dude, you can't, it's 85 degrees. Like, these birds are going to go bad, like, really quick. And he's like, oh, just throw them in my garage on the floor. Like, I'll take care of it when I get back. I'm like, no. So I ended up having to breast out all these birds and get them squared away. But I'm like, if you've got something going on where you're going to be leaving town, like, think about that a little bit before you get in a position where,
Here's a little side tip too.
Ooh, side tip, nice.
side tip, front tip, whatever you want to call it. If you're just getting into hunting and you know any fly fishermen, ask them if they want any feathers. You get all kinds of pretty wood duck feathers or mallards or whatever it may be. But if you can exchange some feathers so they can, tie their flies, then those guys know a lot of waterways and a lot of places that ducks might be hanging out. So that might be an in to find some spots that not too many people know about.
Yeah. Nice little side tip of the week there. Like that.
Side tip.
Yeah.
That's called the late tip.
A lot of tips being thrown around in this episode. So many. Anyway, yeah. So again, the post-hunt processing is something for the waterfowl hunter that may be a little bit different if you've been a big game hunter. And maybe you've processed all your big game your whole life and you're comfortable doing that and that's no big deal. Awesome. There might be ways you want to prepare it a little bit differently, things that you want to do. Maybe you want to keep the wings for future dog training, or you got somebody that's, training dogs, you want to use wings, whatever it is. Just kind of have a little bit of a thought process put into that. We've done episodes on this show with Tim Schloss about if you want to get something mounted, how to prepare it properly for a taxidermist, all that kind of stuff. So check out that episode if you're interested in learning what to do and make sure your bird's ready to be, sent off to the taxi for that kind of stuff. All things to consider when you're out there harvesting birds. So I think that was 5, Dan. I mean, maybe a little long-winded on a few, but I think that was 5, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Well, again, this episode was really designed for the new hunter in mind. And one of the things that we want to focus more on, as we mentioned before, is useful tips and techniques and things like that for both new and veteran hunters. And, everybody starts somewhere. We all had our first hunt. And there's a lot of guys that are going to listen to this episode. They're going to have their first hunt that don't have a mentor to show them the way. And they're just going to do it on their own. And hopefully you can think about these 5 areas before you do it on your own, keep you out of trouble, have yourself a safe, more enjoyable hunt. And love to hear feedback from anybody. If you got other things that you think a new hunter should consider, shoot us an email, hit us up on social media. We'd love to share that with more people. And I think that it was a worthwhile discussion. You got anything else, Dan, you want to hit on before we wrap up?
No, I would just piggyback
back tip maybe.
Back to the back of the tip. Just saying that, looking through what we just talked about, there's so many points here where either we or people we know have had that oh crap moment. And maybe now people will think about it before they step into the water or before they go out and start shooting birds. And, we didn't even talk about any kind of bird ID, but, making sure that you're not over the limit and the regulations. So, you might shoot a pintail and then you'd be like, oh man, what is the limit here? Or, I shot 2 mallards. What's the limit here? So knowing that before you get out there and trying to find it on your phone while you have birds working, it's a lot more relaxing and a lot more fun if you have all that, under control before you make it out there.
Yeah. I mean, the law and the regulations around waterfowl hunting can be a real stressful burden on you as a hunter if you're not comfortable with them, meaning what you can and what you can't do. If you're unsure, find somebody to ask, whether it's us, our Facebook group, your local game warden, anybody that can give you reliable information, because don't want to make a mistake inadvertently or think you're doing something right and make a mistake because you didn't know or you didn't ask. So about the only thing that can be, one of the most dangerous things that a hunter can do, particularly waterfowl, is have the mindset that I've got it all figured out and I don't need to think about these things anymore. Because it's that time that you do that you missed an oversight on a change in regulation and you harvest one too many of a certain species, or I've hunted this hole a million times and all of a sudden for some reason something's changed and all of a sudden you're in over your head in water or whatever it is. Don't be so confident to think that things can't change and that, you've got the world figured out. So we've all been in situations where we're like, oh crap, like didn't expect that or didn't realize that or that could have been bad or whatever. Try to avoid that if you can, because as a new hunter, you don't have all that experience to lean on when you find yourself in tough situations. It's all new. It's all going to be for the first time, potentially. Don't let the first time be your last time, right? Make sure that you've prepared yourself to the extent that you can and kind of go slow. And, you'll be better off in the long term for it. All right, Dan, one last chance for one last thing.
I'm pretty good, man. I'll leave it at that. I like it.
Cool. All right.
It was a good convo. I think that'll be helpful for a lot of people. Like you said, we get a lot of messages and guys that don't have mentors and they want to know where to start. And these are just some, I don't want to say warnings, but definitely things to consider
tips
before you head out. So
there's
a lot of tips, a lot of tips going on tonight. So anyway,
all right.
It was a good one.
All right.
I mean, we're coming up on an hour, so
tell me about the weather. What else we got to hit? Here's the standard. You should get a Falco plug-in. I don't think you got enough. You're fixed this week.
I like Falco.
All right. Well, before we get out of here this week, I do want to take a minute to thank Gunner Kennels, 737, Big Kansas Outdoors, and Cornerstone Gun Dog Academy. CGA is the world's most comprehensive online gun dog training resource. They've got over 160 instructional videos with everything that you need to take your 7-week-old puppy to a finished gun dog. Visit them over at cornerstonegundogacademy.com. You can sign up for their free preview module and begin your training journey today. Cornerstone Gun Dog Academy, the world's most advanced gun dog training resource on the web. All right, that does it for episode 131. Our 5 things for new hunters to consider before they head out waterfowl hunting for the first time. Hopefully you enjoyed our show. If you're new, head over to hpoutdoors.com or iTunes and get caught up on all the past episodes. If you're on iTunes, you can leave us a 5-star rating and review. It'll help other hunters just like you find our program. This is going to be coming out on a Monday after Easter, so happy Easter to everyone. And we'll be back with you next week with new content. For Dan, I'm Josh. Take care.